You are listening to the audiobook edition of Glimpses of World History, written by Jawaharlal Nehru and first published in 1934. This audio presentation has been created by Giribala Joshi using advanced text-to-speech technology.
Chapter 11, A Thousand Years of China. January 16, 1931. News has come from the outside world, news that disturbs and grieves, and yet that fills one with pride and joy. We have heard of the fate of the Sholapur people. We have also had some brief accounts of what happened all over the country when this sad news was known. It is difficult to sit here quietly when our young men are giving their lives and thousands of men and women are facing the brutal Lodi. But it is good training for us. I suppose each one of us will have opportunities to test himself or herself to the utmost. Meanwhile, it does one's heart good to know how our people dare to go ahead to meet suffering, how each additional weapon and blow of the enemy makes them stronger and more determined to resist. It is difficult to think of other matters when the news of the day fills one's mind. But empty musing does not help much, and if we have to do any solid work we must control our minds. Let us therefore go back to old times and live for a while far away from our present troubles. Let us go to China, India's sister in ancient history. In China and in the other countries of Eastern Asia, like Japan, Korea, Indochina, Siam and Burma, we have not to deal with the Aryan people. We have here the Mongolian races. About 5,000 years ago or more there was an invasion of China from the west. These invading tribes also came from Central Asia, and were fairly advanced in their civilization. They knew agriculture and kept large flocks and herds of cattle. They built good houses and had a well-developed society. They settled down near the Hong Ho, which is also called the Yellow River, and organized their state. For many hundreds of years they continued spreading over China and improving their arts and crafts. The Chinese people were largely farmers, and their chiefs were really patriarchs of the kind I have described to you in my earlier letters. 600 or 700 years later, that is, more than 4,000 years ago from now, we find a man named Yao calling himself emperor. But in spite of this title he was more of a patriarch than an emperor of the kind Egypt or Mesopotamia had. The Chinese people continued to live as farmers, and there was not much of a central government. I have told you how the patriarchs used to be elected by their people, and later how they became hereditary. We see that happening in China. Yao was not succeeded by his son, but he nominated another person who was considered the most capable man in the country. Soon, however, the title became hereditary, and it is said that for more than 400 years the Xia dynasty ruled China. The last Xia ruler was very cruel and there was a revolution which overthrew him. Another dynasty, called the Shang or Yin dynasty, then came into power and this lasted for nearly 650 years. In a little paragraph, in 2 or 3 short sentences, I have disposed of China's history for more than 1,000 years. Wonderful, is it not, what one can do with these expanses of history? But you must realize that my little paragraph does not lessen the length of these 1,000 or 1,100 years. We are used to thinking in terms of days and months and years. It is difficult for you to have a clear idea of even 100 years. Your 13 years seem a lot, do they not? And each additional year makes you so much bigger. How then can you get hold, in your mind, of 1,000 years of history? It is a long time. Generation after generation comes and goes, and towns grow into great cities and then crumble away, and fresh cities take their place. Think of the last 1,000 years of history, and then perhaps you will have some idea of this long period. What amazing changes have taken place in these 1,000 years in the world. It is a wonderful thing, the history of China, with its long tradition of culture, and its dynasties, each lasting for 500 years or even 800 years or more. Think of the slow progress and development of China during these 1,100 years I have disposed of in a paragraph. Gradually the patriarchal system gives way and the central government develops. A well-organized state appears. Even in these ancient times China knew the art of writing. But Chinese writing, as you know, is very different from our writing or from the writing of English and French. It has not got an alphabet. It is written in symbols or pictures. The Shang dynasty after 640 years of rule was upset by a revolution, and a new dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, came into power. This had an even longer period of power than the Shang. It lasted for 867 years. It was under the Zhou dynasty that a well-organized Chinese state appeared. It was also during this period that the two great philosophers of China, Confucius and Lao Tse, lived. We shall have something to say about them later. When the Shang dynasty was driven out, one of its high officials named Qi preferred exile to serving the Zhous. So he marched with 6,000 followers out of China into Korea. He called the country Chosen, or the Land of the Morning Calm. Korea, or Chosen, is east of China, so Qi went east towards the rising sun. Perhaps he then thought that he had reached the easternmost country, and therefore gave it this name. With Qi began the history of Korea from 1100 years before Christ. Qi brought to his new country Chinese arts and crafts, and house building, and agriculture, and silk making. More Chinese immigrants followed Qi. Qi's descendants ruled Chosen for over 900 years. Chosen was not, of course, the most easterly country. East of it, as we know, is Japan. But we have no knowledge of what was happening in Japan when Qi went to Chosen. Japanese history is not nearly so old as that of China, or even Korea or Chosen. The Japanese say that their first emperor was named Jimmu Tenno and that he ruled 600 or 700 years before Christ. He is supposed by them to have been a descendant of the sun goddess, for the sun was considered a goddess in Japan. The present emperor of Japan is said to be a direct descendant of this Jimmu Tenno, and is thus also believed by many Japanese to be a descendant of the sun. You know that in our country the Rajputs also in the same way claim that they go back to the sun and the moon. Their two principal houses are the Suryawanshi or the race of the sun, and the Chandrawanshi or the race of the moon. The Maharana of Udaipur is the head of the Suryawanshis, and he traces his pedigree far back into the past. Wonderful people are our Rajputs, and of the stories of their valor and chivalry there is no end. End of Chapter 11, titled, 1,000 Years of China. Chapter 12, The Call of the Past. January 17, 1931. We have now had a brief look at the ancient world as it probably was up to about 2,500 years ago. Our survey has been very brief and very limited. We have only dealt with the countries which were fairly advanced or which have some kind of definite history. In Egypt we have just mentioned the great civilization which produced the pyramids and the Sphinx and many other things which we cannot go into now. This great civilization had had its day, and was on the decline even at this early period which we are considering. Knossos was also nearing its end. In China we have traced vast periods of time during which it grew into a great central empire and developed writing and silk making and many beautiful things. We have had a glimpse of Korea and Japan. In India we have just hinted at the old civilization represented now by the ruins at Mohenjo-daro in the Indus Valley, and the Dravidian civilization with its trade with foreign countries, and lastly the Aryans. We have referred to the famous books which the Aryans produced in those days. The Vedas, the Upanishads, and the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And we have followed them spreading out over northern India, and even penetrating to the south and, in contact with the old Dravidians, building up a new civilization and culture, which had something of the Dravidian in it and a great deal of the Aryan. Especially have we seen how their village communities grew up on a democratic basis and developed into towns and cities, and forest ashrams became universities. In Mesopotamia and Persia we have only briefly referred to the growth of empire after empire, one of these later empires, that of Darius, extending to the river Indus in India. In Palestine we have had a glimpse of the Hebrews, who, though few in number and living in a tiny corner of the world, have attracted a great deal of attention. Their kings, David and Solomon, are remembered when greater kings have been forgotten, because they find mention in the Bible. In Greece we have seen the new Aryan civilization grow up on the ruins of the older civilization of Knossos. The city-states have grown up and Greek colonies have sprung up on the borders of the Mediterranean. Rome, which was to be great, and Carthage, its bitter rival, are just appearing on the horizon of history. All this we have barely glimpsed. I could have told you something of the countries which we have not mentioned, the countries of Northern Europe and Southeastern Asia. Even in these early days Indian seamen from South India ventured across the Bay of Bengal to the Malay Peninsula and to the islands south of it. But we must draw the line somewhere, or else we shall never get on. The countries we have dealt with are supposed to belong to the ancient world. But remember that in those days there was not much communication between distant countries. Adventurous sailors went across the seas, and some people undertook long land journeys for trade or other purposes. But this must have been rare, for the peril was great. Geography was little known. The earth was supposed to be flat, and not round. So that no one knew much about any countries except those which were near. Thus people in Greece knew practically nothing of China or India, and the Chinese or Indians knew very little about the countries of the Mediterranean. Have a look at the map of the ancient world if you can find one. Some of the descriptions of the world and maps given by the old writers are amusing. In those maps the several countries assume extraordinary shapes. Maps of ancient times prepared now are much more helpful, and I hope you will often consult them when reading about these times. A map helps greatly. Without it, we can have no real idea of history. Indeed, to learn history one should have as many maps and as many pictures as possible, pictures of old buildings, ruins, and such other remains of those times as have come down. These pictures fill up the dry skeleton of history and make it live for us. History, if we are to learn anything from it, must be a succession of vivid images in our mind, so that when we read it, we can almost see events happening. It should be a fascinating play which grips us, a comedy sometimes, more often a tragedy, of which the stage is the world, and the players are the great men and women of the past. Pictures and maps help a little to open our eyes to this pageant of history. They should be within reach of every boy and girl. But better even than pictures is a personal visit to the ruins and remains of old history. It is not possible to see all of these, for they are spread out all over the world. But we can always find some remains of the past within easy reach of us, if we keep our eyes wide open. The big museums collect the smaller remains and relics. In India there are plenty of remains of past history, but of the very ancient days there are very few. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa are perhaps the only instances so far. It may be that many of the very old buildings crumbled to dust in the hot climate. It is much more likely, however, that many of them still lie under the surface of the soil, waiting to be dug up. And as we dig them up and find old relics and inscriptions, the past history of our country will gradually open its pages to us. And we shall read in these pages of stone and brick and mortar what our ancestors did in the old times. You have been to Delhi, and you have seen some of the ruins and old buildings round about the present city. When you see them again, think of the past, and they will carry you back and tell you more history than any book. Right from the days of the Mahabharat have people lived in Delhi city or near it, and they have called it by many names: Indraprasth, Hastinapur, Tughlaqabad, Shahjahanabad. I do not even know all these names. Tradition tells us that there have been 7 cities of Delhi on 7 different sites, always moving because of the vagaries of the river Jumna. And now we see an 8th city, Raisina or New Delhi, rising up at the command of the present rulers of this country. Empire after empire has flourished in Delhi and has gone. Go to Benares or Kashi, that most ancient of cities, and give ear to her murmuring. Does she not tell you of her immemorial past, of how she has gone on while empires have decayed, of Buddha who came to her with his new gospel, of the millions who have gone to her through the ages to find peace and solace? Old and hoary, decrepit, dirty, smelly, and yet much alive and full of the strength of ages, is Benares. Full of charm and wonder is Kashi, for in her eyes you can see the past of India, and in the murmur of her waters you can hear the voices of ages long gone by. Or, go nearer still, to the old Ashoka pillar in our city of Allahabad or Prayag. See the inscription carved on it at the bidding of Ashoka, and you can almost hear his voice across 2,000 years. End of chapter 12, titled, The Call of the Past.